Good afternoon, everybody. Today's session is about strategic supply chain management revolving around sourcing and procurement. My name is Frank McLaughlin. I'm the Vice President of the Business Solutions Group for Epicor across International. We'll be looking at the strategic role that supply chain and procurement has within any organisation. It's not enough in the modern era just to be raising purchase orders, if it was ever just enough. But we're looking at the impacts that strategic sourcing and proper procurement practices have on keeping costs down, keeping business efficient, maintaining delivery timeframes and acceptable service levels to customers, whilst also making you a valuable asset for your vendors, because you can't be leaving them behind as part of the overall push for success. The agenda for today is a discussion on supply chain management and how we think things are trending and where they're going. A discussion, a demonstration of some of the elements that make up supply chain as far as Epicor sees and the functionality that we have around that. We'll be then opening that up to a little bit of a company overview and then moving through for questions towards the end. So let's look at supply chain management in a strategic context. Let's see what it actually means to the business. See what we think we can do within that context to make the business grow. Now, supply chain management indicates very simply that it is a link in the chain. Unless you're digging something up out of the ground or burying something back in the ground, you are essentially part of the supply and logistics chain. We've got to look at things at different levels. There's the strategic long-term procurement cycles, the sourcing arrangements and those sorts of things. There's the operational pricing negotiations, and even from a lower level, the tactical, let's get it done. I need this and I need it now. How do I get it? When do I get it? How much do I get? Those sorts of things. So in any business, you're going to have varying levels of interest with different focuses and different horizon points. The whole discussion then comes around, what is sourcing versus procurement? Why do we see those as being different or separate items? Well, in the modern supply era, sourcing should actually take substantial more of your resource time than the actual procurement function itself. The more detailed work you can do on the sourcing side of the equation, the more efficient the procurement activity becomes. That's efficient in the context of not just raising purchase orders, but the overall supply of materials. So they are two sides of a coin, not necessarily 50-50. If you're a multi-company, potentially multinational, even just a multi-plant single company, you'll find that there are advantages in consolidating and aggregating demand, or at least having a view of those demands so that you can bring those into the negotiation process. I've had experience working in a multinational company where we organised the sourcing activities for 5 sites in 2 countries from one single desk. This gave us enormous leverage and took individual business units that were spending no more than $10 or $15 million a year and added their expenditure to the expenditure of the bigger business units. And we became a buying group for some $150 million a year, which has significantly more clout when it comes to getting what you want for the price you wanted, under the terms that you want. So let's look at strategic sourcing as a first call. Let's break it down into the various elements. Now, we're going to look at aggregation. How do we aggregate our demand? As I just mentioned, one single site spending no more than $15 million a year isn't very strong when it comes to dealing with a company that's turning over $500 or $600 million a year. But if there's 5 or 6 sites and or companies within your group, and you're spending $150 million a year, then you have significantly more clout, more power during the negotiation. So aggregating that spend, deciding not exactly when and how much, but from who, for what price, becomes a significant advantage. And if you look at ranking your spending, looking across your supply network, who is it that I spend most of my money with? What is it that I spend most of my money on? If you can achieve substantial cost benefits from only a few suppliers, that's where you leverage most of your effort. Again, coming back to personal experiences, the old 80-20 rule seems to come very much to bear. Whether it be steel, whether it be chemicals, whether it be construction, whether it be manufacture, whether it be aerospace and defense, or whether it be simple nuts and bolts manufacture, there always seems to be a core of suppliers and a set of key materials that I needed to source. And by understanding that, and then spending more time and effort and energy on that, we definitely had a better outcome when it came to the overall procurement cycle. And then we come to the rationalize. The concept behind rationalization is not necessarily to buy from so many different sources that what you do is you then re-dilute your buying power. Again, you can buy fasteners from any one of 20 or 30 different suppliers, but if you focus your energies on 3 or 4 suppliers, rated on quality, rated on price, rated on timeliness of delivery, rated on things like trading terms, you can then focus your energies, focus your attention, consolidate your deals, rationalize the number of vendors that you have to deal with, and through doing that, then redistribute or reaggregate what you're spending. Go through the process of reviewing behavior. The concept of continuous improvement is all about looking at the quality, the timeliness, the cost, the ease of doing business, the trading terms. The 3 or 4 vendors that you look at to buy off in the next 6 months may not be the vendors that you deal with in the following 6 months. Just because someone is outside the ballpark now doesn't mean that they can't come in, and doesn't mean that people that are supplying you now can't be replaced in 6 or 12 months if they start to drift. You can look at processes like introducing new vendors to the situation. If you discover that pricing of various materials, commodities, chemicals, whatever, are continuing to drift in an upward manner, then you could go out and do alternate sourcing and encourage other people into the market space, leaving behind the vendors that have been, quite frankly, taking advantage of what they thought was a captive market. I've seen situations myself where I've looked at continuous price hikes year on year over a 2-year period, and it seemed that every quarter the price was going up for reasons that I could not justify in my own head. So we introduced a new source into the market, crashed the price by 20+%, parked one of our longer term vendors on the bench for 6 months just to prove them a lesson. Because that's what we have to do. Sometimes we have to park our longer term vendors because they're not necessarily doing the right thing and they're taking advantage of what they think is a safe set of situations. Think of some strategies for sourcing. One of the benefits that you can sometimes get, depending on the size of your organisation and the needs of your organisation, are advantageous payment terms. You know, if one vendor is only supplying you on 7-day net, another one's offering you 30-day net, someone else is offering you 30 days end of month with an early discount, they're all good. Same price, different cost to company. And again, it becomes a matter of how do you rate the value of payment terms over sheer money. Does one vendor offer you consignment stock, or as we call it, vendor managed inventory, whereas other suppliers do not, and as soon as it's delivered, it's yours. I've seen very effective situations where 85% of the dollar value inventory turned was managed through consignment stock on extended payment terms. And consumption of material actually became quite a positive for cash flow because we were on 7-day net trading terms on the sales side. So on one side, we were paying 60 days after consumption, holding no inventory in our own books, converting that to finished product and selling that within 30 days on 7-day terms. So look at your strategies for sourcing and don't think it's just about who, it's just how you're looking to buy. Again, I come to that aggregation and refinement of your sources. You're not going to get payment terms like that if there's small pieces of business available for a particular vendor, but they will come together if there's larger pieces of business on offer because they will see the potential. There's the total cost of ownership. So this again comes to any additional costs. When I'm looking at sourcing, am I looking at sourcing locally? Am I looking at sourcing overseas? If I'm looking at sourcing overseas, I'm going to be keeping more inventory because my supply chain is longer, my risks are higher, and the impact to my business is greater if there's a break in that chain. Whereas a total cost of ownership, dealing with someone that manufactures or supplies locally, is potentially lower depending on the risk factors that you build into your calculations on supplier A versus supplier B with the lead times, buffering, those sorts of things. So it's not just the sticker price that comes into it. That then leads to total landed cost. The ability for your environment to cost that if it's imported from China, it has US sea freight, it has insurance, it has customs clearance and delivery at local port, then has delivery to you. So what are those costs as opposed to someone local to you supplying free into store? If you've got two potential suppliers, one in the US, one in China, there may be a difference in price. But what are the other costs required, what else are you going to incur when bringing that material essentially into your inventory? Time-based sourcing is looking at, do I need to buy it all, and do I need to buy it all now? You look at sawtooth inventory methodologies where small drops of inventory are much more efficient for the control of inventory and the maintenance of inventory levels and production efficiencies, but not necessarily good from a cost perspective. Even vendors that claim to deliver free into store don't ever deliver anything for free. They're factored in your frequency of delivery into the price that they're charging. The only way around this is to look at how can I aggregate demand for multiple components from a single source for a single delivery time frame. How can I manage those? Other thought processes are ensuring that you deliver materials on particular days of the week, so you know how you can balance out your warehouse management facilities. If everything's randomly turning up just across the week within a particular day, even for lower volume materials, it's not nearly as efficient in a total sense as saying deliveries are Tuesdays and Thursdays. But how do you control that? You then get to the conversation of, well, would we make versus buy? If it's an assembly, do I make that assembly in-house from components I make and or manufacture in-house? Do I look at bringing on the context of, well, I will do the assembly myself, but I will buy the components? Or do I manufacture the components in-house because I have the technologies to do that and production equipment to do that, but then outsource assembly as some sort of subcontract operation? Do I look at certain parts of my process and say that the investment in those facilities is too high? Therefore, what I want to do is have key parts of the process, which are expensive from a capital investment perspective, outsourced to a subcontractor to get them to work that through. You then start to think about, well, the impacts of big data and advanced analytics. The idea behind big data is the more I know about my environment, the more I know about the interactions within my environment, the more I can use that information to determine what is the most appropriate pricing. Where are the best sources? What is happening out in the market space? If you were to look at the context of steel components and say, well, steel is made from iron ore. What's the iron ore price ton in US dollar terms? What's the average cost of production in the Chinese steel market space? What's the cost of production in the US market space? How's that going to impact a component purchased and delivered to somewhere like Australia? What's the relative cost profile? What's the London Metal Exchange doing currently? If I'm buying copper wire or cables made of copper, wouldn't I be better off checking what the London Metal Exchange is doing and running some index pricing so that I can review the offers from vendors, not necessarily in a, I don't believe that is the good enough price, more in the context of, well, given this trend in the US dollar, this trend in supply availability, this trend in the London Metal Exchange, if we factor those elements in, then your price should be coming off by 3%, 5%. If we factor in information that's available on what major component consumers, automobile companies, etc., in that whole automotive context. Let them be indicators in the price guides. You look at the effect of downturns in other markets. Now, if I was looking at buying steel, I know the steel plants need to run at a particular pace. But if the European market is off, if the UK market is off because of something like Brexit, if the American market is off because of political instability and uncertainty, if the Thai market is off because of certain recent events, then what will that do to the global supply chain? Not necessarily for the individual component or part that I buy, but for the feed-in materials to those. Again, copper cable, plastics, resins, anything that feeds into your materials is something that you can observe to understand the data set, to understand where your pricing should or shouldn't go. This is where we're really talking about using factors beyond your four walls to help shape the conversation with your vendors about how you do pricing. On the flip side, you also need to understand that this sort of information then helps you redefine your conversation with your customers that may or may not already be looking at exactly the same factors. If you're looking at moving into supply to large-scale manufacturers, automotive manufacturers and others, then you can be assured that they're actually looking at the supply chain right back to where it comes out of the ground and looking at the impacts of variation within the supply chain on how that's going to affect the pricing they're expecting to pay. So as supply chain people, we're going to be asked from our sales teams and our pricing teams, why are we paying what we're paying when we're being pushed from the customer base to come up with reasons why the price is what it is, when they know so much more about what's happening within our particular supply chain. So let's have a look and see what we can offer from an Epicor perspective. There's examples of things that can be done within the supply chain to help you bring this information together into a usable format, into a format that then allows you to utilize your business intelligence, your native learnings, your understandings of your own vertical to move forward. Now, the two areas we're going to talk about today, supply chain management, the whole purchase management, distribution planning, inventory, procurement, and some performance management KPIs. We've really got to come into how well am I going with what I think I need to be doing. Let's have a look. Now, this is Epicor ERP 10. I'll just come into my favorite groups for sourcing and procurement. Now, we don't source for any reason other than that there is a need we have to supply a material or a service to conduct business. Given that we're primarily talking about raw materials, components, and that sort of thing, one of the first things to do is look at forecasting. Now, we can either forecast at a finished goods level or forecast at a materials level, given historical consumption data, trend analysis, etc. Ideally, if you're a multi-plant environment or a multi-company environment, you've got that then split out to say, in plant 2, I'm not forecasting anything. In plant 1, I have a forecast that says I've got numbers rolling forward. Now, that can either be for use or for sale or combinations of the two. You could be working in demand contracts. Again, This could be raw materials, intermediates, finished goods, sub-assemblies. This is essentially saying I have a demand contract with a major consumer. They are going to be forecasting on a demand contract. I can then use that demand contract information to feed into my sourcing and forecasting, because I know that I need to have this, and I can have purchase contracts tied to my demand contracts. So I know how much I'm procuring to cover off a particular demand contract. Obviously, MRP runs when we tell it to, and considers what we tell it to. Do we want constrained materials considered? Because you have some materials that are freely available and not necessarily controlled. You may choose to normally deal with only 2 or 3 vendors, but you may have a broad spectrum of vendors that are available to you on short notice. And do I want historical dates? If it hasn't arrived today, it's not going to arrive today. We go in and have a look at particular parts, items, components, raw materials, depending on how you want to look at them. Typically purchased, different units of measure, because I could be talking about inches, I could be talking about kilos, I could be talking about lots, I could be talking about serial numbers. I can group those, I can classify those, I can look for alternate materials, alternate suppliers. I can have various revisions of those materials. And when I need to, I can look to restrictions on where I can store that material and where I can procure that material. Does the supplier not only qualify for our needs, but does the supplier have a license to sell that product in our area? So it becomes that next level of sourcing. So if I have a look at the part again, and perhaps what I want to do is I want to look at where the item's used, or more interestingly, maybe I want to look at approved suppliers. And search up the approved suppliers list. And in this case, I have 2. They don't necessarily need to be preferred, they just need to be approved. From a sourcing perspective, what is the supplier part? Are they the manufacturer, or are they sourcing from a manufacturer themselves? What is the manufacturer's part? What is the life cycle status? This is very important in some areas. What's the market availability of this particular component? Because if this starts to move to a life cycle status towards ending and market availability becomes limited, then as a sourcing practice, what we need to do is either find alternate sources or get with our engineering and product groups to find alternate materials and or engineer this out. Having the ability to define not just the supplier, but the manufacturer and the manufacturing life cycle, the market availability, is key to supply chain stability in the longer term. If we then look at, we have supply licenses. So which suppliers are qualified to supply which materials, which classes of materials, which types of materials. Not every purchase point can necessarily supply every material. What attribute does that supplier have? So are they certified? Are they ISO certified? Are they UL approved? Okay. There's no license number, etc., etc. So you can see that we go through when we can define attributes and control how we deal with vendors in the longer term. So we then get into the context of sourcing versus procurement, because sourcing can look after the license controls, the restrictions, the pricing. Whereas procurement can say, okay, now I understand that MRP has created some demand for me. I need to now go off and buy that material. One of the first questions would be, where can I go buy that? Well, if I have a purchase advisor, you can say, well, have I purchased it before? Yes, and from whom? At what actual lead time? Do I have any currently on order? From whom? What price? Do I have any currently in inventory, and where? Do I have approved suppliers? And do I have supplier price lists? And how long are they effective for, what quantity? If I wanted to see information in a multi-company context, say, well, in this particular part, it's only stocked in one plant within one company. But what if I was talking about a totally different component? 2 companies, 2 plants, different stock levels. So I can see what's on hand, the demand, and the availability. I could compare costs. I could compare actual lead times. So I could be looking at the supply chain efficiency for a part across multiple suppliers, across multiple companies, across multiple plants in a single view. Being then able to make aggregated procurement decisions. If I wanted the system to automatically suggest schedules, I could set up part schedules where, for a particular item, I have 2 suppliers. And one supplier supplies 40% and the other supplier is 60%. Maybe on a different material, I want to switch that around and say it's 60% for one and 40% for the other. So the system is then enforcing sourcing rules on the procurement activity. As I said at the beginning of this, sourcing is where you should be spending most of your effort. Sourcing will predetermine your success. Procurement should be a very simple execution of the rules that are set up within sourcing. You have forecasting and demand management, planning and scheduling, creating the timeliness of the need, sourcing, determining how you satisfy that need. You can have procurement locally and sourcing controlled centrally. In fact, if you have multiple companies, multiple countries, multiple plants, it's almost certain that a good portion of the high value expenditure will be controlled centrally, or at least should be, by someone who has all the information available to them and is a top-notch negotiator. We discussed the concept of knowing exactly when the best time is to deliver from a supplier. When I was doing supply chain and operations management, one of the questions I would always ask my suppliers is, what is it that we do that costs you money? One of the most interesting answers was, you ask for deliveries when we're not due to deliver in your region. So we then discussed the concept of, well, when do you come to where we are? We're there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have a truck running past. Your 2 pallets can go on that truck just about any time. We can now offer you a reduced delivery fee. So by simply understanding the concept of engagement with the supplier rather than beating them up, and talking through what are the things that we do that cost them money, we were then able to reduce our inbound freight costs substantially by timing our requests for delivery with their ability to deliver under normal terms and not have to put on special transport. Don't underestimate the value of a good conversation with your suppliers about what it is that you do that costs them money. Supplier relationship management is just as important as customer relationship management. This all then goes to, what am I having delivered and when? So if I'm looking at this particular item, it's saying, okay, I've some inspections, some on hand. I can see that I need to get some receipts on a purchase order. I can see I've got some sales orders. I can see I've got some jobs and my ending balance inventory is dropping. I can see that I need to get some activity done for this date. Otherwise, all these jobs will stop. So what the system would be suggesting is you need to move this delivery from the 20th up to beyond the 15th. Because if you don't, you won't supply on time. I could transfer in for another plant, but if I didn't do anything at all, I'd be 867 components short in my manufacture and well below not only zero, but also my minimum on hands, and I'd be breaking all my rules when it comes to supply. This is an excellent way of looking at changing your order policies, running MRP, reviewing the outcomes, and then either executing those policies or reverting back to the original set of policies. You can model out what your inventory is going to look like over time with different sets of policies. And if that's the case, you can then start to factor in total cost of ownership calculations. So when it comes to buying, when it actually comes to executing the procurement side, what do I want to do? Well, I want that to be as mechanical as possible. I just want to come in to a buyer workbench, look at my purchase order suggestions, look at a list of things that I need to buy that are materials. Yes, here it is. I need to buy some more nuts. That's fine. I'm just going to buy that because I can. Now, could I go through and say this is a different material? Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can buy some of that. Oh, that's an invalid supply. I can't have that. I've got multiple materials, different suppliers. Do I just generate the purchase orders? Yes, please. So forecast, demand management, planning, scheduling gives you everything you need. And then on the flip side, your sourcing tells you where to buy it from. The other element to look at, change suggestions. I want to see everything that looks like it needs to be changed. So here's an item I need to postpone. So not only can it tell me what I need to postpone, if I wanted to, I could see things to cancel, expedite, increase, postpone, and reduce. I can accept those, I can edit the PO, I can edit the PO release. So I can do the work mechanically very quickly within the buyer's workbench itself. We talked about container landed cost. The concept behind container landed cost is I not only have within one shipment multiple PO lines, PO releases, potentially from multiple vendors, consolidated into a single container. Not only do I have their duty rates, but I also have indirect costs, costs regarding freight, and costs regarding import fees, any number of costs from any number of suppliers, all going through to look at the dispersed landed cost, in this case using value as a method, but you could use the quantity, the volume, the weight, or manually apportion costs. So within one shipment, within one container. You can have multiple items from multiple suppliers, multiple items, single suppliers, multiple purchase orders. You can associate costs from a variety of different sources, so it's not just the Ex Works price, it could be the FOB price, it could be the sea freight costs in US dollars, as we said, local landing charges, customs clearance, deliveries, duties in local currency, all coming through to your reporting currencies. But if you don't have that, and you're looking at, well, show me my purchase price variance, maybe I simply want to look at a graph to show me that my fabricated metals are significantly higher when it comes to unfavorable PPV by class than anywhere else. So perhaps what I want to do is I'll put a legend on that, and I want to put a label on that and say that's a percentage, and let's break them all out, but anything less than 5% I want it to others. Right, so I can see that doing it that way, my fabricated finished goods procured is 58% of my purchase price variance. But I have machine parts at 5.37, steel at 23%, and the collection of others at just over 13%. So from a let's pay attention to what really matters, I'd be looking at the suppliers of steel and the suppliers of finished goods for a please explain on why I have so much unfavorable PPV in those classes. If I wanted to see by individual receipt, if I wanted to see favorable by part number, if I wanted to see unfavorable by part number, giving me a real view of supplier. Acme Supply, look at that. It's easy to say that whoever's responsible for Acme Supply, and secondarily who's ever responsible for Fastenal, would be the two people that I'd have in for a conversation, and the vendor would be drawn in immediately after that. Why? Well, that's favorable, sorry. Unfavorable. Oh, Rainforest Painting, Samson Steel, United States Distribution. That makes up something like 75% of my unfavorable by supplier in 3 suppliers only. Knowing that information gives you the opportunity to drill into why is that the case. Is it that we're not defining sales price and contacts properly? Are they having some sort of variability built in? Or are they just very bad suppliers and we need to be going and finding somebody else? Unless we know that information, we can't work on it in a constructive manner. Last but not least, what's happening to my excess stock? Now, if I look at stock by group, what groups have I got excess stock on? By supplier, by manufacturer, by individual buyer. Now, if I want to have a look at that in a different context, I've got Howard is 4%, undefined is 95%. So I've got someone out there without defined buyers. Excess stock by product class. Whoever's looking after the class 2000 materials has got way too much stock. If I wanted to have a look at individual components, do I want to see flat washers? Do I have too much? Well, I have plenty of demand. I have plenty of outstanding purchase orders coming in. I have plenty of opportunity to use it, but I seem to have gotten myself in a situation where I have far, far too much in stock right at this particular point in time. If I looked at the matched K-nut that goes with it, smaller amount of demand, smaller amount of purchase. Being able to see your excess inventory gives you the ability to define your inventory policies, your practices at a procurement level. Looking at PPV and supplier relationship cockpit lets you understand your sourcing requirements better. This is a singular view to say, okay, give me a look at the on-time ratings, service ratings, and quality ratings. Do I engage any sort of late buffers, early buffers? If I'm looking at purchase orders, what am I buying from them? Am I looking at any suggestions? Am I looking at any problems with any invoices? If I want to review that same information on-time basis, 60% of the deliveries are on time, 12.5% early, 25% late. That's not good. Is Fastly any better? They're either on time or late. They're never early. The ability to see this data, they're early or they're on time. Early might be okay. On time, definitely. Late, never. So you see, you can get quite a bit of information to help you execute the procurement, but drive your sourcing policies. This has been a walk through the concepts around forecast and demand, through MRP to planning and scheduling, through the ability to control sourcing, and then the simplified execution. So I hope that was an appropriate demonstration. As I said, we've gone through and looked at supply chain, we've looked at performance management. We're talking about where are the benefits, cost savings, aggregation, realignment allows you for cost savings from a spend perspective. The whole ability to manage that spend and observe excesses, aligning sourcing to the business objectives. What is our forecast? Don't buy simply because you think you need to, buy because there is a real need. Obviously, greater visibility, being able to know exactly who you can buy from, where you can buy from, whether they're certified, how much you've bought, what did it cost, how do they perform, how much have you got in inventory still. Being able to capture things like total landed cost and purchase price variance. You think you've got a good price, but the PPV is always there. So who's Epicor? At a glance, we're 20,000 plus customers, about 3,800 employees. We operate directly or through partners in about 150 countries in the world. Revenues approaching $1 billion, a substantial company. Our focus is fairly and squarely to the mid-market. We can scale very successfully from 20 to 30 employees all the way up to thousands of employees. And in the upper mid-market to large is where you're going to get that multiple company, multi-country, multi-plant, multi-currency, consolidated purchasing happening, for sure. Offices just about everywhere. And where we don't have direct offices, we have very successful and very strong certified partner network to support us. Why look at Epicor? The flexibility of the solution to impose best practice as it applies to you. This is done through a continuous focus on innovation in our technology platforms. It's also reinforced by deep domain expertise in a lot of operational areas. One of the reasons I'm doing this conversation is I've got over 20 years hands-on experience in supply chain and operations management. in a variety of different domains. And of course, we're focused on our customers, as everyone who deals quality business should be focused on their customers. So thank you for your time. I hope you found that informative. If you have any questions, visit epicor.com or log up with the call administrator. Thank you.